Welcome back to the Racial Draft Podcast, where we change the complexion of the comic book universe one draft pick at a time. I am your host, Michael Ford, back for another solo episode right here in the holiday corridor, smack dab between Christmas and the new year of 2025. So this is our last podcast of 2024. And, we skipped a week because of some holiday travel snafus. And for that reason, I'm going to take you through a recap of both rounds 3 and round 4 of our racial draft, season 8. If you're new to the program and new to the project of the racial draft, I'll give a quick rundown where we're reimagining these characters through a racial lens, these comic book superhero heroes and villains, as it were. And we're sort of engaging in the intellectual exercise of what if these different racial and ethnic delegations acquired the characters and reimagine them, and from the ground up, as if those characters had been that racial background all along. And of course, they do have the option to draft characters that are already in the canon of this background in order to preserve them in their racial form. But let's jump right into it. The first pick of the third round, and that came from the Black delegation. They drafted Scott Summers, aka Cyclops. I think that I've talked in the past about how I do think that Cyclops, his character would be enhanced by being a person of color, particularly a black person. In fact, given that a lot of his type A personality traits can be filtered through the lens of a uh, a member of a minority who feels like he has to be twice as good in order to get any level of respect. I think that when it's a type A white male character, it comes off as a lot more um, annoying and grating. But I mean, and he's still going to be to some extent annoying and grating. But like I said, when animated through the lens of he's part of an oppressed group already of mutants, but being part of an oppressed racial group, being driven by this attitude that in order to rise above, he has to be an overachiever, in not so many words. And I would say that among the X-Men characters, he exemplifies overachiever more than any other character, and I think that that's a reason that, for me in particular, I do approve of the Cyclops racial drafting by the Black delegation. However, in looking at how the people feel about it, a little bit more mixed. The final approval rating from the listeners, from the audience, as it were. And I should mention, you can cast your approval votes in a number of places. It's still open on the website, racialdraft.com. Those polls stay open for the entire season. And there's also polls. There are also polls on Instagram that stay open for the entire season. On Threads, it's a much shorter poll, but you can cast your vote there. And on Twitter, you can also cast your vote. And the result of the Twitter poll is 75% approval rating for Black Cyclops. So with 50% strongly approving, 25% somewhat approving, and 25% racist. In that they strongly disapprove. In terms of the Black delegation, came up with a fan cast, which I think is a pretty cool fan cast. I think I did, in fact, suggest it. And unfortunately, the fan cast was even less well received, and that was Regé Jean Page. I think it's Regé Jean Page, a British actor. You may have seen Bridgerton, or you may have seen in the Dungeons and Dragons movie. He's got leading man potential, I would say. And, again, another character that exemplifies the leading man potential is in fact Cyclops. So that's Cyclops. Um, Moving on from the first pick of the round to the second pick of the round, a little bit. This pick I'm a lot more mixed on, if I'm being honest. That would be the Native American delegation drafting Thor. Their drafting of Thor does kind of undercut a lot of things that Thor has worked for him, given his roots are in Norse mythology. And obviously, he's been embraced by Nordic communities, and he has a very Nordic look to him. Some might say to the extent that there are Aryan Aryan groups, they very much aspire to a Thor aesthetic. So I do think that there are some challenges that come in reimagining through the lens, through a Native American lens. As of yet, I haven't heard anything from the Native American delegation in terms of how they would like to square the history, the cultural resonance of Thor in terms of his Nordic roots with Native American cultural aspects, and of course, if that does change, if we get a little bit more color, so to speak, in terms of how to reconcile those things, I might move off of my current position, which is that I'm not sure that I approve. I'm in the sense that I don't know that this is a change that can adequately reconcile and adequately maintain all of the qualities that we traditionally associate with Thor. But again, I'm willing to get more information, more explanation. I would love to have the Native American delegation, representative Native delegation, Shao Toriano, on the show to kind of talk us through what he sees in terms of how to make a Native American Thor work. But as they say, as of now, it's a no for me, dog. But let's find out whether people feel different. And in fact, I would say they're more in line with my line of thinking in the sense that 60% approval, but the 60% that approved did strongly approve. Uh, and yet there was a large group of 40% that somewhat disapproved of the pick. So that accounts for the 100%, 60% strongly approve, and 40% somewhat disapprove of Native American Thor. The fan cast is an actor that I'm not very familiar with. Doesn't seem to have the physique that one would also associate with Thor. His name is Tokala Black Elk. If you are familiar with his work and think that he could pull it off, go ahead and let us know. But like I said, he doesn't quite have the stature that we traditionally think of when we think of Thor. And that also got 60% approval, with the same 60 strongly approve and 20% somewhat disapproving and 20% strongly disapproving. So that moves us on from our Thor to the third pick of the round, which comes from the Swana MENA delegation, also known as Middle Eastern. And they have selected Stephen Strange, where I think this works on a couple levels in the sense that we've talked a lot before about how, pardon me, we talked about how uh, Doctor Strange's origins are very kind of steeped in Orientalism. Obviously, there are some personality qualities, that do lend themselves to the, kind of white guy trope. But even though he's a arrogant SOB who also happens to be extremely talented. I would say that white people don't have a monopoly on arrogant but talented, specifically physicians. I think that physicians, successful genius levels physicians, are found in every community. And, like I said, I think that there's an Orientalism in how Doctor Strange was initially depicted when he was a little bit more mysterious and a little bit less purely heroic, that have since over time kind of been sanded down into him being viewed as, traditional, East Coast, well educated white guy. But I don't think that those are essential qualities to the character. Like I said, I think that you can have arrogant, successful, talented physicians regardless of their background. And I think that making him a brown man would undercut some of these European and white supremacist tinged tropes. So, again, I don't think that that's necessarily anything that's specific to Doctor Strange being, from that part of the world, from Southwest Asia or North Africa. I mean, I don't think that it goes that deep, but I also think that there aren't a lot of qualities that go super deep in terms of solidifying his whiteness. So, for me, it pushes me towards approval. But I seem to be in the minority here because the people soundly disagreed with the pick. Only 42 9% approval rating for Swana Doctor Strange. All 42.9 strongly approve, with 42.9 somewhat disapproving, and 14.3 strongly disapproving of a Swana Doctor Strange. So, not a win there. Not a win there from the approval banks. We'll move on though to the fourth pick of the round, which comes from the multiracial delegation. They drafted Elektra Nachios, used to be known as Elektra, I guess still is because that's her name, but currently taking on the mantle of Daredevil, who of course she had a long-standing on again, off again romantic relationship with Matt Murdock, the original Daredevil. So, at the moment they share the mantle. Elektra has been depicted traditionally as Greek. However, in the Daredevil Netflix series, which we're not really sure what her status is as they move those shows into the MCU proper. She was actually portrayed by a biracial actress, Elodie Young, who was both Asian and European. And they incorporated that aspect into the character. She was Greek and she was Asian. And I believe she may have been adopted. Don't quote me on that front. But, be that as it may, there were a couple benefits to presenting the character in that way. One of which is that, we talked a little bit with Doctor Strange about Orientalism. Elektra is very much a martial arts coded character and a character that is, generally steeped in Asian iconography. So, having her be an Asian woman, at least even partially Asian, that is reflecting our culture through martial arts is a lot. It's not as problematic as, again, this persistent trope of, well, when it's an Asian person doing martial arts, that's not that special. But, when it's a European or white person doing martial arts, those are the real special ones. Those are the real cool characters. So, again, in making her, in giving her Asian heritage, so to speak, you're getting rid of that trope and you're allowing, like I said before, the representation while also still keeping her character roots of being Greek, of being from a wealthy background, and very worldly in that sense. As like, again, Americans don't have the monopoly on worldly travel, well-traveled, rich women. In fact, there's actually more of a stereotype about some wealthy heiresses from Europe. So again, I think it worked just in the same way I think that it worked in the Daredevil show. I think that it could work in the canon as well. And the people agree with me. 100% approval rating for multiracial Elektra, 83.3 somewhat approve, and 16.7 somewhat approve. And I do believe the multiracial delegation stuck with the fan cast. So let me get to the fan cast as well. And I believe, here we go. Yes. So the Elodie Young fan cast with who the multiracial delegation stuck with, and that also got 100% approval rating, with 75% strongly approving and 25% somewhat approving of Elodie Young's portrayal of Elektra. Moving on to the fifth pick of round 3. Kind of funny. Fifth and sixth picks are, kind of in two pieces. Starting off with the Southeast Asian delegation, drafting Barry Allen, aka The Flash. This is a character that obviously has traditionally been depicted as white, but mostly it's because he has blonde hair. But thankfully, hair dye exists. However, there have also been versions of the character, most notably on the CW, where he has not had blonde hair. So clearly, having blonde hair is not an essential characteristic of the character. I know, essential characteristic, but bear with me. So yeah, he He's been drafted by the Southeast Asian delegation. There was a fan cast that they selected, so that does inform whether he's East Asian or Southeast Asian. Manny Jacinto, who you might know from The Acolyte or from some of his other roles. Sorry about that, guys. I think that he has a lot of glimmer in his eye, and I think he would make a fine Flash. And like I said before, I don't think there are really any characteristics of the character that necessitate him being a white guy. And it's for that reason that I think that we are at 100% approval rating for Southeast Asian Flash. A little bit lower, which was shocking for me. 81.8% approval rating for Manny Jacinto as Barry Allen. And I can't say I have any objections for that. I think that both of those things work for me. As I said, there were two halves, and the second half of our combo is the white delegation. They decided that they were going to get themselves a Flash. They actually drafted Wally West, the second Flash, formerly Kid Flash. Now he's another character who's been associated with a hair color. He's a redhead, and too bad Ren's not here to impart his agenda against the redheads. But yeah, I mean, Wally, there's a couple things about Wally. Wally, over time, for a big chunk of the history of the character, was kind of depicted as a bit of conservative, a bit of a Midwest conservative. Not not in the sense that we think of conservatives today, I would say, but leaning away from some of the more liberal sides of things. But other than that, I think that there aren't a lot of things anchoring him to whiteness, which is why we have had Wally West imagined as a black character. But the white delegation decided to sort of stick with it. He's a Scarlet Speedster. He's uh, obviously has been depicted as white and can continue to be depicted as white. And there was a fan cast, Mike Feist, who you might know from Challengers, I believe that's what he was last at, was their fan cast. That fan cast got 100% approval. The Ollie West staying white only got 85.9% approval. Sorry, 85.7% approval. So there you go. More approval for the casting than for the pick. But either way, very much trended towards approving of white Wally West. Moving from a character that was very much approved to a much more controversial character, and I kind of understand why. The South Asian delegation drafted Bucky Barnes, aka Winter Soldier, and this one's a little bit more challenging. My understanding, first of all, there's Bucky's a character that has had James Bucky Barnes, the Winter Soldier, has been depicted in a couple of ways, and whether in the comics or in the films, but inextricably his origin is tied to either being sidekick or best friend to Steve Rogers in the early 80s, growing up in New York and serving in World War II. I think that, let me figure out the best way of saying this. My understanding of the role that Indian Americans played in American culture at the time, in American history at the time, uh, such a thing would be a little bit harder to to reconcile. Not obviously, there were more than likely uh, Indian Americans who fought for the American forces in World War II, but it would not have been a common thing. Uh, like I said before, the the superhero, the comic book origin of the character is very much uh, him being sidekick is part of a PR move for Captain America. And I think that having him be, um, I believe that trying to remember the delegation that drafted Steve Rogers. Oh, I think it was. Huh, sorry, guys. I'm drawing a blank as to which delegation drafted Steve Rogers. But I mean, obviously, in the canon, Steve Rogers is white, and having him be a, having Bucky be his Indian, not Native American, but from India, sidekick would definitely have been received a lot differently at the time. So I'm curious. I'm super curious about. Sorry, guys. Just needed to double check, find out where. Oh, yes. So it was a Native American delegation. So anyway, in keeping with our racial draft rules, you would have been dealing with a Native American Steve Rogers who was white passing, most likely, in those days, and you know, an Indian American Bucky. Again, not to say that those things couldn't have happened, but it does sort of stretch the our understanding of what the cultural um, factors of play would have been at that time. And so it's tough. It's challenging for me, and it seems to be challenging for the people as well because I was only 55.6% approval rating for South Asian Winter Soldier, and the 3% approval for sorry, 33.3 somewhat disapprove, and 11.1 strongly disapprove of South Asian Winter Soldier. For the fan cast, uh, Dev Patel was chosen, a fine actor who's very popular, and you might, he can definitely pull off the role both, from a looks perspective and from an action perspective. So I understand why the fan cast got 87.5% approval. And, you know, like I said, Dev Patel's a fine actor, and notwithstanding the issues with trying to make it work from a historical perspective, Dev Patel could probably pull off the role just as well as Sebastian Stan could. Moving on, we find ourselves at the Jewish delegation, a character that I was surprised stuck around this long, and that would be Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel. I don't think that she's been traditionally depicted as a white woman, blonde hair, eyes, from Boston, in the comics from Boston, I believe from California in the movies, because of Brie Larson, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, it's really not that big of a change to make her Jewish. Obviously there are Jewish people in Massachusetts, so that covers those bases there. And pretty much everything else can stay the same. Obviously, there are things, uh, a la Star. Um, that there are jokes to be made, I suppose, about the significance of Star in her life. But you know, there's really not too much to be said. So 100% approval rating for Jewish Carol Danvers. I do believe that there was a fan cast that was Evan Rachel Wood, a little bit less positively received, only 77.8% approval rating on that front. But even still, generally approving of Jewish Captain Marvel, Jewish Carol Danvers. That brings us to the ninth pick of the third round. Another character that I was surprised was still on the board at this point, and that would be Deadpool. Now, obviously, one of the issues with Deadpool is that he's been so closely associated with Ryan Reynolds in pop culture. But, comic Deadpool has a lot more flexibility in terms of his irreverent sense of humor. Obviously, he's Canadian, but there are Latinos in Canada. But other than that, other than how he's, visually depicted, there really aren't too many things that would give you pause if Wade Wilson were somehow not a white guy. So, on that front, I don't really have a cause for disapproving of this pick. And in fact, the people feel the same. 100% approval rating for Deadpool. Weirdly enough, 100% somewhat approve of Latino Deadpool, but still, Latino Deadpool uh, passes muster. As far as the fan cast, I gotta be honest, I don't know much about this actor, Marcelo Hernandez. I believe he's on SNL, but I've never seen his work. His approval rating was at 60%. So, much less popular than just the reimagining of Deadpool as Latino. Moving on from Deadpool to the final pick of round three, which is from the Polynesian delegation, and they drafted Bruce Banner, aka the Hulk. Now, Bruce Banner is another character that, yes, there are some advantages to Bruce being white guy in terms of the stereotype, the nebbish, nerdy guy who has a monster inside of him that, some might say, it's very much a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde situation, but it can even be viewed as, and being able to express your anger versus not being able to express it. So there is some room to explore that perhaps a person of color, as Bruce Banner, he's even more impressed about being able to show anger in a society that doesn't typically allow for anger without negative consequences. So I think that there's a little bit of room for improvement, in fact. And I think the Polynesian delegation found a really good fan cast that we should move on to. Jermaine Clement. If you've seen his work, I think you'd be pretty confident that he could play a Bruce Banner type character. So 100% approval rating for Jermaine Clement as Bruce Banner, and 100% approval rating for Polynesian Hulk. So 80% strongly approve, 20% somewhat approve to both. And, that concludes the third round of the Rachel draft. But like I said, there was a fourth round. So I will go ahead and advance my page to the fourth round, which starts off with Gwen Stacy. Not that Gwen Stacy, the one that's still alive from Earth 65. You might also know her as Spider-Gwen. She hasn't been depicted in live action, but she has been depicted in animated form in the Spider-Verse movies. She obviously had a fun run of her own Spider-Gwen comic. She was introduced as part of the Spider-Verse saga, so it only makes sense that she's associated with Spider-Verse movies. She's traditionally been depicted as having blonde hair, but at the same time, other than the blonde hair, which again, dye exists. Other than the blonde hair, there aren't a bunch of other qualities that lend her to be more strongly associated with being Caucasian, being of American white descent. And I think that the Polynesian delegation found themselves a really powerful fan cast there. Sorry, Auli Carvalho, who you might know as the original live action Moana. Sorry, the original voice actress for Moana, not the live action. But yes, 100% approval rating for her as Spider-Gwen, which, I think is really fine casting. In terms of the Polynesian Spider-Gwen, unfortunately, a little bit more mixed of a result. 71.4% approval rating, 57.1 strongly approving, 14.3 somewhat approving, and 28.6 somewhat disapproving of the Polynesian Spider-Gwen. But again, like I said, other than the hair, there are too many things in the character inherent to the character that make me feel like she needs to be white. Moving on to the Latin delegation. The Latin delegation in their drafting of Moon Knight, this is a character that's already, in a way, being racially drafted in the fact that he's been portrayed in live action as part of the Moon Knight series by Oscar Isaac. I guess I could suppose that one thing that has changed is that this is a little tricky because Moon Knight in recent years has been strongly associated with being Jewish. Obviously, there are Latinos who are Jewish. But I always like to reiterate, one of the things that happens when you reach through drafting is that you're drafting how they primarily identify. But again, you can be Latino and you can be Jewish at the same time. So this racial drafting would just make Mark Spector primarily see himself as Latino while also seeing himself as Jewish. If in fact that's the direction the Latino delegation chose to stay with. It's that pick which got 100% approval rating, which is a little bit surprising, but you know, nice to see. But the reason that it's so surprising, I guess, is because the Oscar Isaac portrayal of Mark Spector only got a 90.9% approval rating. So more approval for just the abstract idea of a Latino Moon Knight than for the casting and portrayal of Moon Knight by Oscar Isaac, which a lot of people are big fans of. So, 90% is nothing to sneeze at, but 100% just for the concept, that's kind of cool. But moving on from the Latin delegation to the Jewish delegation, and they didn't get Moon Knight, but they did get Joker. And this is a character that's had some ups and downs, mostly up though. Notwithstanding the Folie à Deux debacle. This is a villain that is super popular. Maybe popular is not the word, but very widely known, very iconic is probably, I know that word gets thrown around a lot, but I think Joker is probably one of the more iconic villains. He's anchored $2 billion movies, which even a lot of heroes couldn't say that. He's been imagined in a variety of contexts. He's obviously Batman's arch nemesis, and in keeping with being Batman's arch nemesis, he's usually depicted as very formidable in his own right. He's had several solo books, and like I said before, a solo movie, well, two solo movies, as it were. Joker's not going away anytime soon, and I think that there are there have been depictions of the Joker that have, um, I mean, I'll take a step back. I don't think that there's anything in the Joker's portrayal that makes you think that he could be Jewish. He's obviously been played by Jewish actors, and I think that to the extent that the Joker leans on the comedian trope, there are quite a number of Jewish comedians and Jewish aspiring comedians, any of which could have taken a dramatic turn into a supervillain. So can't really say that I have a cause for disapproval there. And the people agree with me, 100% approval rating for Jewish Joker. I should mention that it bears mentioning that the fourth round voting is still open. So go ahead to all the places that I mentioned before, Twitter, primarily, but also racialdraft.com, Instagram, and cast your vote for whether you approve of these picks in the fourth round. So as of now, 100% approval rating for Jewish Joker. They also presented us with a fan cast of Dave Franco. You have the lookalike, the Luigi lookalike, so to speak. A little bit less well received, I suppose. 66.7% approval rating for Dave Franco in the fan cast. 50% strongly approve, 16.7 somewhat approve, 16.7 somewhat disapprove, and 16.7 strongly disapprove of the casting. But as of now, 100% approval rating for Jewish Joker. Moving on to the South Asian delegation. They had this pick before. So it's not super controversial, and it would be Kate Bishop, aka Hawkeye. She's been traditionally depicted as white, or at least white passing. That being said, there's really nothing in her character other than the fact that she's kind of well off. But even being well off doesn't necessarily foreclose you of being a person of color, especially if you come from older money. So I think that I definitely think that there's not a real uh, impediment in the thinking to say, well, you lose something from the Kate Bishop character if she is something other than a white girl. Or, yeah. So, not really a lot else to say about Kate Bishop. I mean, as a character, I guess she's not really as visible as you would think that she would have been after anchoring the Hawkeye television series alongside Jeremy Renner. I mean, Haley Steinfeld is a pretty popular actress, and by now we would have expected to see her a bit more. She did pop up, and we do expect to see her in a Young Avengers project whenever that project comes off, gets off the ground. But it's been a while now, and it's been surprising that her profile hasn't expanded to the extent that we thought it might a couple of years back. But all that is to say, as of now, 75% approval rating for South Asian Kate Bishop, 50% strongly approve, 25% somewhat approve, 12.5 somewhat disapprove, 12.5% strong disapprove. As for the actress, Maitreyi Ramakrishnan, sorry, let me make sure I said that right. Yeah, Maitreyi Ramakrishnan was the fan cast. I gotta be honest, I'm not familiar with her work. But I do know she's very popular. She's got a youthful energy to her, so I would imagine that she would be good at playing Kate Bishop. The approval rating for that pick is at 83.3% approval, 75% strongly approved, 0.3 somewhat approved, 8.3 somewhat disapprove, and 8.3 ceased. Moving on to the white delegation, right down the middle. Fastball right down the middle. Kara Zor-El, aka Supergirl. What's there to say? She is a wholesome, all-American blonde superhero. Traditionally been depicted as white. Going to be depicted as white in movies. So it's a very defensive pick, and it's a very timely pick. She's got a movie on the horizon. And who knows? She may appear in this year's Superman movie. She's already appeared in other Superman media, so there's no reason to think that she wouldn't. A little bit controversial, I suppose, from the people, though. I was surprised to see this. 77.8% approval rating, with 66.6 strongly approving, 11.1 somewhat approving, and 22.2 somewhat disapproving of Supergirl staying white. And again, there's time for you to get in there and cast your votes, listeners, if you either agree or disagree with the split right now, the percentage split. As far as the fan cast, they kept, they stuck with the casting that WB and James Gunn and DC Studios went with Millie Alcock as Karen, and that's 100% approval. 90.9 strongly approved and 9.1 somewhat approved, but again, 100% approval rating for the fan cast. Moving from the white delegation to the Southeast Asian delegation, and we're staying in the realm of Superman. We're staying in that mythos, and we're getting East Asian Lex Luthor. This was a pick that we got way, way, way back in the first season of the racial draft, and it still fits. Even to the extent that we're dealing with a Lex Luthor who is a self-made billionaire, very powerful figure who has a reason to look down on Superman. I think that you can imbue Lex with a little bit of model minority energy and adds layers to the character. I think it makes him perhaps even stronger of a villain as someone who feels like he had to overcome so much to become the seminal figure in Metropolis, only to be usurped by Superman. Like I said, I think there's some additional layers that can come from this character being reimagined as not as other than a white man. And I don't think that the fact that he's been depicted that way means that he has to stay depicted that way. And in fact, we've seen, which is a little bit more controversial to me, we've seen depictions of Lex lately as as both a darker skinned white guy and also a white guy, most notably in the Harley Quinn show. So even now, we've been moving away from the idea of Lex Luthor as a sort of powerful white man. So yeah, for that reason, that's definitely a strong reason to approve. The people right now, 83.3% approval rating, and all 83.3 strongly approve, with only 16.7 somewhat disapproving. For the fan cast, big fan of the fan cast. Daniel Day Kim, who you might know from Lost, who you might know from um, the Last Airbender show, yes, and some other things kind of across television. Yes, Daniel Day Kim, and in the stage as well. Very very handsome, very composed. He definitely play a successful billionaire who might have a little bit of a dark streak to him. So yeah, Daniel Day Kim's Lex Luthor gets 100% approval rating right now. If you agree, go ahead on down to Twitter, cast your vote. If you disagree, could do the same. But like I said, I'm a big fan of Daniel Day Kim as Lex Luthor. Keeping the Superman adjacent streak going is the multiracial delegation who drafted Lois Lane. Now, I could see where there might be some controversy here, given that Lois has also traditionally been depicted as a white woman, but similarly to Lex, that has been changing. Even very recently, she was depicted as Asian in My Adventures with Superman animated show. I don't necessarily think that there's a lot in her story that makes her have to kind of be firmly tied into being a white woman. Anyone can be a reporter. Anyone can be a, you know, really driven reporter. So I think that the multiracial delegation, what I typically call the skeleton key delegation, because a lot of different characters can just have multiple ethnic backgrounds rather than just one. They went with the Eurasian, sort of in keeping with the Asian depiction of her in My Adventures with Superman, but acknowledging the white roots of the character and the white roots of the sort of connected characters to Lex. I mean, sorry, to Lois. Um, can't say I have an issue with it. Lois again having a moment. She's going to be alongside Superman. She's been alongside Superman for 5 seasons of the, was it 4 seasons? I can't remember, of the Superman and Lois show, which ended a little bit earlier in the year. Um, Again, My Adventures with Superman, big part of that show. Pretty much nowadays, she's everywhere that Superman is, and even now in the comics, she just recently got superpowers, so she's now known as Superwoman, and she shares a Superman book with him. So she is really coming into her own and blowing up as a character right now. So she's a strong acquisition for the most racial delegation. And again, I don't think that this really diminishes the character in any way to give her an additional culture alongside, her traditional white background. But people feel a lot different from me. Apparently, only 60% approval rating for multiracial, specifically Eurasian Lois Lane. There was also a fan cast with Sonoya Mizuno, who you might know from Devs, or also from House of the Dragon. 66.7% approval rating for her. Oh, she was also in Ex Machina. But again, She's an actress of Eurasian descent, and I think that she very much resembles, uh, how one might imagine a Eurasian like Lois. It's the Lex Lois double, double whammy. It's hard, but yes. So 66.7% approval rating, 50% strongly approve, 16.7 somewhat approve, 16.7 somewhat disapprove, and 16.7 strongly disapprove of Sonoya Mizuno as Lois Lane. The Superman streak may have stopped, but the DC streak continues with the Swana Mena delegation and their acquisition of Selina Kyle, aka Catwoman. What's there to be said about Catwoman? Earlier in the round, we had Batman's arch nemesis, and now we have Batman's chief love interest. As we know, she's been depicted from a number of racial backgrounds. She's been white, she's been black, she's been Latina, she's been multiracial. So, to have her be a different kind of brown, especially with the history of cats being so prominent in both Persian and Egyptian culture, and there was a lot of room to imagine this character, with I think in this sense, um, this one delegation went with Persian. And like I said, there's a deep history of an association of cats and Persia. So can't really say I have an objection to it. The people agree, 100% approval rating for Persian and Selina Kyle. And the fan cast of Sarah Shahi, who you might know. Where might you know Sarah Shahi from? Oh yes, she was in Black Adam. So let's not hold that against her. But she's a fine actress, definitely looks the part. And as of right now, it's only 66.6% approving of Sarah Shahi as Selina Kyle. We'll see how things shake out a little bit later. But you've got more than enough time to cast your vote and see whether you approve of both Persian Selina Kyle and Sarah Shahi in particular portray Selina Kyle. And that brings us to the ninth, the penultimate pick. Again, staying in the DC realm is a Native American delegation, and they've drafted Poison Ivy, Dr. Pamela Isley. Other than the old redhead factor, there's really nothing else that codes Poison Ivy as having to be white. She's a doctor, but guess what? Doctors are not all white. I think that, our fierce environmentalism, anti-corporatism, just genuinely being misunderstood in recent years, she's gone from being depicted and understood as a full villain to, a little bit more of an anti-hero, which with occasional villainous tendencies, for sure. But I think that, if you imbue her with the kind of Native American sort of, I'll say it's a little bit stereotyped, but, harmony with nature, wanting to preserve the land and not have the land be destroyed by corporate business developing forces. Some of those same forces, which led to native lands being taken away from them. I think there's a lot that can be additive when when depending specifically which tribe or nation, so to speak. When those cultural elements are viewed into Pamela Isley, and her Poison Ivy persona. So I personally think this is a situation where the character becomes stronger as a Native American. But as of now, it's still 100% approval, 50% strongly approve, and 50% somewhat approve of Native American Poison Ivy. There was also a fan cast, Corianka Filcher, who I've seen in some things, and definitely embodies those Poison Ivy qualities. Doesn't have the red hair, but again, guy exists. So that's a quick change. 100% approval rating for her too. So 75% strongly approve and 25% somewhat approve. of Native American poison ivy. And that brings us to the final pick, the 10th pick of round 4, comes from the Black delegation. And they went ahead and drafted Rogue. We've talked about Rogue before. We definitely talked about how there was kind of a viral moment where, people kind of as a community online wanted to fan cast Keke Palmer as Rogue, in part because even though she's traditionally been depicted as white, Rogue has a lot of qualities that we associate with Black Southerners. In that, she's a little bit on the thick side, definitely feisty, definitely, willing to scrap a little bit. I think that she's not, she's less of a Southern belle and much more of a, um, you know, came up a little rougher. And I think that for that reason, probably a lot of Black women associated with, not, identified is what I meant, identified with Rogue. And I think that, to the extent that there are characters that lend themselves to race bending, I think that Rogue has always been one in terms of her coding. And I think that that's why the Keke Palmer fan cast, kind of works. So, I think that the Black delegation went a strong pick there. I think that we're smart to stick with the Keke Palmer fan cast, as both got rave reviews, 100% approval rating for Black Rogue, 60% strongly approve, 40% somewhat approve, and 100% all strongly approving of the Keke Palmer fan cast. So, chef's kiss to the Black delegation, and coming through with a strong pick, the final pick of round 4 with Rogue. So that's it. Those are we ran through 2 rounds of picks. I don't want to keep you guys too long. Hopefully in the coming weeks in the new year, we'll have some guests and we'll kind of chop it up a little bit more as we talk about the pros and cons of these characters. But I'm sure you don't want to just hear my opinion. And again, you can also have your opinion heard because you can email us. In addition to commenting under any of the topics in any of the posts on our various social media, you can email Rachel Draft at RachelDraftPodcast@gmail.com. If you're not saying things that are too crazy, we'll go ahead and read your email on the shop, and I'll give you my take on it. And whoever else is there will give their takes as well. You can find us at all the regular places. YouTube, if you're looking at my face right now. You can also see my face on Spotify. But you can just listen to my voice on all the places that the podcasts go. Subscribe, like, share, tell your friends about us, and hit us up on all the various platforms, all the various social medias, and RachelDraft.com. That's the hub. That's the place where you can connect to everything else. I'm not going to belabor you with all the different other plugs. We'll save that for 2025. But until 2025, all things are possible.